you trying to put together the perfect bracket? We've got 5 keys for you.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your hosts. This is the man, Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Schade. You're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. Thanks for making us your first listener watching. Andy, big special shout out to all the everydayers out there checking this episode out, which is brought to you by our good friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Andy, this is a special little bonus episode for us on Tuesday. We've got our usual full episode where we're previewing basically the whole left side of the bracket, games to know, names to know, predictions, and all that. Make sure you check it out as well. But we figured, we're just about 48 hours away from tip-off of this bad boy, this whole madness. And so we want to give you some help as you fill out your bracket. So we came up with 5 keys to help you do just that. So Andy, let me just say one thing before we even get into these. Folks, if you've ever played fantasy football, you know how you have to know the scoring. Do I get 6 points or 4 for a passing touch? What's it worth for a field goal or an extra point or a sack or whatever? The same is actually true of your bracket. There are different ways to score this. I've done it where literally each pick is worth 1 point, and whoever gets the most points wins. I've seen it where upsets are like multipliers and you get more points for that. I've seen it where just each successive round is worth a certain number of points. So it's like, if you win the national championship, if you get that right, you get like 320 points or something. So make sure that you know your bracketing scoring, because that's going to help you in determining how you choose your games. Andy, that was a free one for the good people. We've got 5 keys. Why don't you kick us off with the first one?
First key is to pick upsets early, but to not pick upsets late, or to go chalk later in the bracket. And we'll talk a little bit more about when you should pick upsets, how many upsets you should pick. A lot of that is, I think, kind of the crux of how to get the perfect bracket. You don't want to pick every single team that's favored to win. You also don't want to pick every team that's not favored to win either. But definitely as you get further into the bracket, and again, Isaac mentioned it, it also depends on your scoring. If you get more points for getting the Elite 8 right, the Final 4 right, and you're genuinely trying to win your bracket, whether it's bragging rights or there's money on the line, whatever it may be, you're probably not wanting to put that fun mid-major darling team all the way into the Elite 8. Yes, it happens, but the fact that we can pretty much name every time a 10-plus double-digit seed team has made the Final 4, the VCUs, the George Masons, the Loyola Chicagos, the fact that that is kind of just like something people know means it doesn't happen very often. So you don't necessarily want to go that way unless you feel really strongly about it. You want to pick the upsets early. You want to pick the 12-5s. You want to pick the 11-6s. We'll get more into the numbers on that. But when you're getting into your Elite 8, you're probably wanting to stick mostly with some of those top 5 seed teams, because generally those are the teams that end up being in that conversation. I'll use my bracket as an example for those of you who listen to the Bracket Breakdown show, or if you listen to Tuesday's show of Locked On College Basketball, I talked about how I have a 12-13 matchup in the second round between Grand Canyon and Charleston. That's a pretty bold prediction, but guess what? I don't have those teams going much farther than that. I have Grand Canyon advancing, North Carolina taking care of the Lopes before we get into the Elite 8, because you just don't want to hedge. You don't want to push too far with those teams. So I think that's kind of the first key, is making sure that you got some upsets in there, but that you're not taking those upsets too far, because it's just the numbers say that that's not happening all that often.
Key number 2, Andy, as I fill out my bracket, I should pick upsets, but the question is, how many upsets should I pick? Andy, the way I think about it is, what's that sweet spot, as you were just kind of alluding to, of picking some but not going wacky with it, where you're just missing and then you got no teams left as we get into the later rounds. So we're going to define an upset here as a 5-seed spread. So that would be anything from 6-11 all the way out to 1-16, 1 versus 16, right? Those are what we're looking at as a seed upset. We're not talking about point spread upsets yet. Those are 2 different types of upsets. Right now, just a seed upset. Andy, in the 64-team era, there have been 38 tournaments. The most upsets we've ever had by this definition is 14. Interestingly enough, happened in 21 and 22. The fewest we've ever had was in 07, where we had just 3. What a chalky thing that was. But here's the thing. Fewer than 7 upsets total, that's only happened in 12 of the 38 tournaments, so less than a third, and just once since 2010. But at least 10 upsets or more, there have been 15 of the 38 tournaments, but it's getting more frequent. Andy, here's why I say that. We've had at least 10 of these definition upsets that we're talking about right now in each of the last 3 tournaments, and Andy, 9 of the last 12. So you'd rather trend a little closer to 10 than you would to under 7. Andy, the average in those 38 tournaments is 8.5 of these upsets. So here's my suggestion, Andy. I think that between the first and second round, that's kind of what Andy was talking about of when you should be riding these upsets. I would suggest that you'd pick somewhere from 7 to 10 of these upsets, 4 to 6 of them in the first round, and then another 3 to 4 in the second round, like a 7/2, for example, something like that. And so that's kind of the thing you're looking for here as you get to about 7 to 10 upsets, 4 to 6 in the first round, 3 to 4 in the second round, enough to where they're there, but not too many where you ain't got nothing left in the Sweet 16 and beyond.
Well, key number 3 is kind of in that same vein. It's where do you look for those upsets? Because we can tell you to pick 7 to 10 upsets, but if you're picking all 4 15 seeds to beat all 4 2 seeds, you're probably not going to have a great time. Or if you do, it's the craziest NCAA tournament that has ever happened. So we want to talk about where you want to pick those upsets to happen. And I think it's clear, even though it has happened in 2 of the last 5 years, 2 of the last 4 years, 1 seeds rarely get upset by 16 seeds. The historic record for 1 seeds against 16 seeds in the NCAA tournament is 150-2. Obviously, the Purdue lost last year. That was a big storyline. Virginia lost 5 years ago, but it does not happen very often. And while you might think, well, the 15-2 is not nearly as rare as the 1 seed versus 16 seed, it's still pretty darn rare, folks. 141 times that the 2 seed has won compared to just 11 times where the 2 seed has lost to a 15 seed. However, as we talked about there being more upsets lately, that remains true even of these 15-2s. There has been 1 15 seed over a 2 seed in each of the last 3 tournaments. Really shocking stuff. We saw St. Peter's, we saw Princeton last year, we saw Oral Roberts the year before that. Dunk City, Florida Gulf Coast was a really popular one before that as well. So they do happen. And if you feel real bold, if you see something you love, maybe you can go for that one there. But those, just as a reminder, they are exceedingly rare. The ones that are most common, unquestionably, are those 12-5s and those 11-6s. For those of you who have filled out brackets before, you know this. It is generally accepted, advised to pick at least 1, maybe 2 of those 12-5 or 6-11 upsets. And in fact, looking at the data, there have been 35%, 53 out of 152 instances where a 12 seed has beat a 5 seed. Some of you may think, well, 35% actually sounds kind of low. But if there's 4 of them every year, the odds are pretty darn high that there's going to be at least 1. And again, sometimes 2 every single year. Similar odds with the 6 versus 11 seeds, 38% of the time, 58 out of 152, where the 11 seed has beat the 6 seed. So if you're looking, where am I going to put my bets here? Where am I going to expect to see some of those upsets? You know, we're not counting the 7-10s as legitimate upsets because it's only 3 seed difference. But if you're looking for some of those bigger upset potentials, the 11-6, the 12-5, those are absolutely the ways to go this year. We got some really exciting matchups in there. And I think there's a potential to pick. Really, you can make an argument for any of those 12-5s, although I'm less confident about UAB over San Diego State. But there's some intriguing matchups this year. And for those of you filling out your brackets, you're going to want to look at those 12-5s.
And Andy, that's where we start talking more about the point spread side of it. We've been talking seed upset. What we want to do is just to let you know that as you look for upsets, don't just look at seeds, but look at the seeds that have a tighter, smaller point spread. So, for example, Andy talked about some of these. Well, we've got Drake as a 10, Nevada as a 10, New Mexico as an 11. They are all actually favored at FanDuel our good friends FanDuel. And
Mhm.
so and sometimes you're not going to have it favored. So you look for the smallest. Andy was just talking about those 512s. Grand Canyon and James Madison are the 12s that have the smallest, what am I looking for? How do I want to say that? The smallest differential between them and the better seed, where it's just 5.5 for those teams, whereas UAB is a 7.5 point underdog and McNeese is a 6.5 point underdog. Or if you're looking 13-14, man, those get big. Yale's a 12.5 to Auburn. Vermont, 11.5 underdog to Duke. Charleston, a 9.5 point underdog to Alabama. But Samford is just a 7.5 point underdog to Kansas. So that's a place where you could look and maybe find some value.
Well, Isaac, we want to talk about what you should be looking for your national champion. What characteristics, what traits do you want to see in the team you're picking to win it all? And what character traits and things do you not want to see in that national champion? We're going to get to that in our final 2 keys to filling out your March Madness bracket. Coming up after a word from today's sponsor, Nissan. Folks, this week's March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we are picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest. Just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys were able to take it to the next level. And we're talking about Danny Hurley and the UConn Huskies. They can only be described as a Nissan Armada. This top-seeded team is as hardcore as it gets out there. It is no wonder they've landed the top overall seed in the NCAA tournament. They're one of the favorites to win it all, despite 4 of the 6 Power 6 conference champions standing in their way in the East region. So take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. All right, Isaac, 2 more keys to talk about here to filling out the perfect March Madness bracket. We talked about the upsets. We talked about what to do with those first round games. That's where it's the most fun. That's where everybody's watching those games Thursday through Sunday. But frankly, for those of you who are trying to make some money, for those of you who are hoping to actually win that bracket, it all comes down to who you got as your national champion. You got to get that right. If you don't got the national champion, your odds of winning, especially in a bigger pool, pretty slim. So here are some keys to picking a national champion. First of all, you're looking for a team that has balance. Teams that are very bad offensively, very bad defensively, typically they're not in the conversation to be national champions, but that is not always the case. KenPom's data goes back 25 years. It is a phenomenal resource for college basketball stats and data and analysis. And what it has told us is that teams that win the national championship are almost always top 10 teams in adjusted offensive efficiency and top 25 or top 20 teams in adjusted defensive efficiency. Now, this data is from the end of the tournament. So teams right now that are kind of on the outside but close could very easily win 6 games in the NCAA tournament and end up being in that conversation. But teams that are not particularly close, well, the odds of them winning the tournament and kind of bucking this trend, they're a little bit slim. And there's 5 teams that really stand out on the do not pick line. And these 5 teams, 3 of them are not good defensively. 2 of them struggle offensively. The 3 teams that you don't want to pick because of their defense are Alabama, Kentucky, and Illinois. And look, these 3 teams are all 3 top 5 offensive teams. Alabama is 2nd, Illinois is 3rd, Kentucky is 5th. But the problem, none of them are even in the top 90 in adjusted defensive efficiency. Isaac, 2 of them aren't even in the top 100. Illinois comes in at 93rd in defensive efficiency. Kentucky is 108th. Alabama, we talked about them a bunch on Locked On College Basketball this year, and their defense, they are 112th. The odds of those teams being able to capably defend for 5-6 games, making it all the way to the national championship, it's just a little hard to imagine. And I think if you're filling out your bracket, picking teams that are really not within anywhere close to that range of top 10 or top 20 can be a little bit challenging. It's a little bit risky. On the other side, offensively, Iowa State's 55th in adjusted offensive efficiency. Kansas is 65th. Both of them are top 10 defensive teams. In fact, Iowa State is number 1 in defensive efficiency, but there's concern about whether those teams have enough offensive firepower. Again, you look at Iowa State, they got to play UConn. They're going to slow UConn down. They're going to hold them to a pretty good score, most likely. But even if you slow UConn down and they still score 67 points, can Iowa State, with their offense, get to that level? That's the issue that you have with the Cyclones. That's the issue you have with Kansas, amongst some injury issues and other things going on with the Jayhawks. But that kind of puts those teams in that conversation of, I'm not sure that I'm comfortable picking them to win it all this year.
Oh, Andy, yeah, I'm just looking at UConn. They've scored a lot of points all season long. Hashtag deep analysis. Andy, the other thing, when it comes to picking a national champion, do not, Andy, pick a team that shoots under 35% from the three-point line. Why not? Well, in the three-point field goal era, Andy, we have crowned an NCAA national champion 36 times. 35 of those teams have shot 33% or better. That is 97%. The one outlier was this team called UConn in 2011.
Cardiac Kemba.
They were decent, right? They and look, let's be honest, that's a team that just caught fire. One of just two teams that ever made it through a conference tournament, winning 5 games in 5 days. The other, NC State, just literally did it. Yeah. And so, like, that's an understandable outlier, and it was just barely an outlier. They were, I said 35 have been over 33%. UConn that year was 32.9. But Andy, I think an even better indicator, because 30 of these 36 teams have been 36% or better. And there's just kind of a big gap between those 6 and the upper 30. And so I'd like to round it off to 35 and say that you got to be better than 35%. So who are some of these teams that are under that 35% threshold? Well, there's 4 of the big boys, Andy, that I think concern us, some more so than others. You just talked about Kansas and that offense. Well, they missed this one too. They are 33.3 repeating percent on 3-point field goals. Andy, that's not good enough. Literally only UConn, that 2011 team, has been worse. Tennessee, 34.2%. Houston, 34.7%. And Iowa State, 34.9%. Now, those last couple get really close to that 35% threshold, so you feel maybe a little better about them, but still, I say that to you so that you exercise caution before you press go. A couple others that aren't seated as high, that are just stay away from them candidates: Mississippi State, 32.5%. Utah State, 32.1%. San Diego State, 31.3%. Andy, that's 307th nationally. And Texas A&M, who is at 28.4%, 353rd in the nation. That is by far the worst three-point shooting team in this field, Andy. And so stay away from all those teams. Now, who's good? Who do you want to count on? UConn, Arizona, they are both over 36%. Purdue, 40%. They're the second best three-point shooting team in the nation. Kentucky, obviously, they're the best three-point shooting team in the nation. But once again, as Andy talked about, that defense would rule them out from choosing them as a national champion. So, Andy, Purdue, Arizona, and UConn all fit this bill.
Yeah, and I would include Houston as being really close here, because they're one of the few teams that counts in terms of having a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense, or being right in that conversation. They're actually 17th in offensive efficiency, second in defensive efficiency. And I'll say this: if Houston wins a national championship, it is almost certainly because over the next 6 games in the NCAA tournament, they shoot over 35% from 3.
That's right.
34.7% right now as a team. In 6 games, if they shoot 38%, which it's a hard thing to gamble on. I'm not saying we should just assume they're going to spend 6 games against the best teams they've played, or against a lot of good teams, I should say, exceeding their expectations. But it's not crazy to me to imagine a Houston team being in the NCAA tournament championship, having a season average over 35 or over 36%, over 35%, and being in that conversation. But outside of that, I mean, Auburn kind of qualifies here. Arizona qualifies here. Both those teams have had their warts this year, and I don't think are going to be as trendy of national championship picks as maybe they should be based on some of the analytics, some of the data here. Purdue, really hard team to pick away from right now. I know people, they're a trendy pick to get upset early because of what happened last year. I remember filling out a bracket in 2019, I think it was, and a lot of people were picking Virginia to lose early, and guess what? Virginia won the national championship the year after losing to UMBC. So not saying that's going to happen to Purdue. I'm just saying if that's the only reason you're picking away from the Boilermakers, might want to look at it again, because this team is really good at doing the things that they need to do to potentially win it all.
To which I say, be the contrarian. If you've got dorky, dumb friends who are like, oh, Purdue's going to do that again. Dude, there's how often are you going to get this value from a 1 seed, Andy?
Yeah.
So,
take the money.
Take the money and run and laugh as you go. So to recap, 5 keys Upsets early, chalk late. How many upsets should I pick? We'd say 7 to 10. Where should I look for upsets? 5-12, 6-11 is a great spot. Next, picking a national champion, they need to be balanced and they need to shoot over 35% from three. Andy, though, here's the deal. We've just said all this definitive stuff, light it on fire as of what, Friday morning when you wake up, because everything we just told you could go up in flames. So here's what you should do. Ignore everything we just said. Give the bracket to your spouse or friend or coworker who has zero knowledge about college basketball and just tell them to pick their favorite color or mascot or whatever. And it's guaranteed that they're going to end up doing better than you, or if you listen to our advice. In all seriousness, though, for all of you that have nothing financial on the line with this thing, what a great opportunity to create a bracket pool, connect with friends or family or coworkers, and just have a special moment throughout the month of March and even into April. And oh, by the way, sometimes it really is an okay thing to cheer for that upset that's happening, even if it does screw up your bracket, because that's what this is all about. The madness, let it happen. So Andy, happy March Madness to all our friends out here, folks. We hope you enjoy the ride because there's absolutely nothing else like it. We'll be back with you on Wednesday to preview the right side of the bracket. Make sure you don't miss out on that. Until then, though, apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats. And on Wednesday, we'll tell you till then. Peace.